and then we will hand this off to Kobe for our official welcome from the Corporation for National and Community Service. Welcome, Kobe.
Thank you. So first of all, I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to actually participate in this call. I understand that this is a long session in the middle of the week, and people are very busy. But it's important because what we're trying to do at the Corporation for National and Community Service is expand our national footprint in terms of serving veteran and military family members. A critical component of that strategy is informing our stakeholders, our grantees, our program directors, and our members about important issues facing the veteran and military family community. So the corporation was authorized in 2009 to begin providing services to the veteran and military family community through our AmeriCorps and Senior Corps models. And we were also asked to engage more veterans and military family members as AmeriCorps members and Senior Corps members. It's an important task, and it's an important task and a timely task, given that we've got 1.5 million veterans returning to our communities within the next 5 years. Obviously, AmeriCorps and Senior Corps programs have a wide community footprint, and with over 76,000 AmeriCorps members and over 300,000 Senior Corps members, there's an opportunity to provide these solutions to scale and have a serious impact on our community. So with that, what I'd like to say is we will continue to grow our programs and initiatives. The CEO welcomes everybody on the call and has always asked that I express her sincere commitment to this national initiative for veterans and military family members, and that the corporation has invested wisely in this space and will continue to expand our investment in this space. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists, or excuse me, I'm going to hand it off to Debbie to do a description of our session and learning goals, and then we're going to do an introduction of our panelists.
Alrighty, today what we're doing is talking again about veterans in service to your organization, debunking the myths about wounded warriors. Like we've talked about, our service members sometimes become wounded, ill, or injured, but these injuries do not prevent them from contributing to society and continuing to serve. Rather, they often make them more resilient, determined, and committed to service. The couple of slides before here that Kobe had put up here talk to you about our goals for this session is shifting the dialogue, that we want these post-deployment adjustments to be seen as natural adaptations to intense stress, not pathological illnesses. There's so many intense stresses that folks have, and these can be just natural adaptations that these folks have to go through. We also want to be able to increase your awareness to resources and be able to educate yourselves. Go ahead to the next slide. Oh, and Kobe will address some of these common questions that we'll talk about on these questions and then tell you about the folks on the next slide.
Thanks, Debbie. So what you see in front of you are a series of questions that we've been taking from different sources through our knowledge network and other places that really kind of, what I would say, capture some of the questions, concerns, and issues that our program directors have as it relates to employing wounded, ill, and injured service members and veterans with disabilities as AmeriCorps members and as Senior Corps volunteers. We hope that this webinar will help address some of these questions and that people aren't afraid to ask these questions in an open environment. And there's, of course, non-attribution in this learning session, and we really want people to be open about their issues and concerns about using AmeriCorps members and Senior Corps members as national service members, and also their issues and concerns about providing services to that demographic, to that core demographic. What I would say is an encouragement of our expanded commitment in this area, is that we've got people on our side, and that that includes Dr. Ainspahn and Mr. Joe Gorman, who are going to join you today. But it also includes members that are currently already serving with disabilities in AmeriCorps and have served in AmeriCorps and Senior Corps with disabilities previously. On your upper left-hand side, what you see there is a picture of Mike Brimmer. Mike Brimmer is in the yellow firefighter's outfit, and Mike Brimmer spent about 3 years looking for employment, part-time employment, off and on. He had applied for disability benefits with the Department of Veterans Affairs, and eventually he was connected through the AmeriCorps California Conservation, or excuse me, Southwest Conservation Corps, and applied to become an AmeriCorps member. While he was an AmeriCorps member, he actually led a fire team of fellow veterans for over a year, and at the conclusion of his term in service, he received a full-time employment offer from the Bureau of Land Management. And not only did he do that, but every single member of his fire team, so there were 9 other veterans that he helped lead through that year, also received full-time employment. And this was a veteran with a disability that was not only performing his national service, he was leading and excelling in his national service opportunity. On the top right, you see a picture of Tim Lovett. Tim Lovett is an Iraq War veteran. He was injured in a IED explosion in Baghdad, and suffered a TBI, and also suffers from post-traumatic stress. Tim, as well, when he came back, was struggling with his own experiences of war, and several members of his unit committed suicide when they came home. Tim eventually also found AmeriCorps and ultimately wound up leading and starting the first ever Veterans Corps in the state of Washington. That Veterans Corps connects fellow veterans with other AmeriCorps members to assist them in reintegrating into a college campus environment, to succeeding and mentoring and tutoring through mentoring and tutoring programs, and ultimately to graduate. Right now, today, there are AmeriCorps members at every single public college, university, or plans thereof to have one in the state of Washington. So an amazing accomplishment by an AmeriCorps member with a disability. He currently works for the State Department of Veterans Affairs and uses a lot of his time to talk about how AmeriCorps and national service can be a solution for the veteran and military family community. On the bottom, you see a picture of Bobby Davis. Bobby Davis is actually also a reservist, but her husband, who was in the Army, was killed in Iraq. And when she found this out, she moved back home and was really struggling to find, her own way. She eventually joined the American Legion Auxiliary and convinced them and helped them work to connect with national service and our national service program. She's speaking there at the launch of Veterans Corps that occurred on Veterans Day last year, and that launch initiative was a serious commitment by the corporation to connect AmeriCorps Vista members with National Guard substance abuse counselors all around the country. So today there are over 23 states that have AmeriCorps Vista members and AmeriCorps members that are assisting guardsmen and reservists who are struggling with substance abuse and behavioral health issues. So this is another example of how resilient individuals who have experienced extreme trauma and returned and excelled in national service. So with that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk to you about how veterans in service to your organization can not only act as assets to your community, but also, some tactics and strategies that you all can use and leverage in recruiting and retaining AmeriCorps members into your programs who have disabilities. So with us today, we have Dr. Nathan Ainspahn. Dr. Ainspahn is a senior personnel psychologist with the Army's G1 civilian personnel. Dr. Ainspahn has edited and submitted comments to books, particularly one book in particular, Warrior Returns, Managing the Transition at Home, as well as The War's Returning Wounded, Injured, and Ill Handbook that was published in 2008. Dr. Ainspahn is currently a researcher for the Office of Disability Employment Policy at the Department of Labor. For most of the people on this call, the Department of Labor is a key partner, both locally and nationally, in terms of addressing challenges and barriers to employment for individuals with disabilities. When he was there, he conducted research and led training sessions on ways to improve employment opportunities for individuals with disabilities and how to address employer misperceptions, which is an important topic that we're going to talk about today, of hiring individuals with disabilities. So thank you, Dr. Anspaugh, for joining us. Also with us, we have Joe Gorman, who is the Director of Executive Recruitment and Military Initiatives at Macy's. Joe also has 3 children who are actually in the military services. I believe you got an Army, Navy, and Marine Corps member in your family, and he's also a veteran himself. The reason why we reached out to Macy's is because they were recently recognized as a best practice by the Chamber of Commerce in terms of recruiting and retaining veterans with disabilities, and we really wanted to provide an opportunity for you all to see how one organization or entity has really created and crafted a comprehensive strategy for engaging and leveraging employees with disabled veterans into their workforce. So Joe's here, and he's a representative of many other employers who are out there doing this great work, but we thank him for taking his time today, also for coming and speaking with us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Anspaugh, and thank everybody again for being on the call. On your right-hand side, you've got the chat. Feel free to ask questions during the session, and we will take all of the questions after the session. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. As they said in the 80s on a TV show, I'm going to review the past material. So, as they said previously on LA Law, and if you get the joke, you've just dated yourself. And since I made the joke, I'm dating myself as well. I'll summarize some of the highlights from the last session on Wednesday. They presented a lot of good information, a lot of good resources. I encourage you to get the transcript or the slideshows. There are a lot of good charts and data. I can't really do justice to it in the few minutes I have for it, but I will give you the best resources that were presented in that and a sense of what was talked about. The session on Wednesday, there was a clarification about PTSD and TBI and employment. The big takeaway was noting that PTS, post-traumatic stress, is different from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. The PTS is a naturally occurring response to a traumatic event. You don't have to go to Afghanistan to get PTS. There are things that could happen, an accident, a car accident here, other nasty things could produce post-traumatic stress. Many people may go through minor instances of it, and it can dissipate over time. PTSD is when this reaction to the stress suddenly dominates your life and can make doing many tasks difficult. In a way, there can also be post-traumatic stress growth, and we've seen this with many, many veterans. After going through these experiences, they actually come out more resilient, stronger, and better capable to deal with a lot of life's problems. And then the bulk of the presentation was data about this population, resources, and advice to use. I'll go through very quickly the top ones I think will be most helpful to you, just to reiterate it, and we will reference these later in the slideshow. America's Heroes at Work is a program offered by the VA and DOD and Department of Labor. Job Accommodation Network can help you with making accommodations so a disabled veteran can work at your organization. We'll speak in detail about that. If a wounded warrior needs some communications or electronic or computer equipment to help them do their job, an adapted keyboard, a listening device if they've lost their eyesight, this is an amazing program. The Pentagon runs it, the Computer Electronics Program, or CAP, and what that does is it will provide this technology absolutely free of cost to the veteran to allow them to do the job. The big caveat with this is it's available for free, but only to a veteran who's going into the government, the federal government, or while they're still in uniform and or transitioning out. So once they finally leave the service and go to work in the private sector, they wouldn't be able to get access to the equipment. So it's critical that if you know someone who's in the transition process, that they get access to this program and to the equipment before they place out of it, because they could get thousands of dollars of equipment for free. And then the National Resource Directory lists thousands upon thousands of useful places to get information. The next slide. The VA has the Vet Success Program for the warriors to access and learn about job opportunities, how to do a resume, etc. Real Warriors Net is brought to you by the Department of Defense to provide resilience information to transitioning service members. ONET Military Crosswalk, one of the biggest problems that we're seeing for transitioning service members is they can't describe what they did in the military in a way that a civilian can understand. They can tell you they were a 107. And if you're a private sector employee, you have no idea what that is. And this crosswalk allows the military person to type in their MOS code, which is their job category, and it's a database that will then link them to civilian equivalents and information about those career choices, where they can get training, and how they can describe what they did. And then the last line on this, there's federal and state incentives. There are many tax benefits that you can get from the federal government. If you bring in a disabled warrior, you can help reimburse the cost to put in a ramp if they're using a wheelchair, things like that that can really offset any costs you might have in accommodations. And on the next slide, there's a number of organizations that you can access for information. The White House has the Joining Forces, Department of Labor, vets, every what's called one-stop center, and every community has one of these, usually under contract to the Federal Department of Labor, and these are places where people can come to get job searching information, and employers can reach out to find employees. Every center should have a DVOP, which is a Disabled Veterans Outreach Program Director, and a LIVER, which is the Local Veterans Employment Representative Program. So you could use the service locator address to find the one closest to you, and make make contact with the DVOP or LIVER, and they can put you in touch with veterans. There's also the National Association of State Directors of Veterans Affairs. Every state has some type of VA equivalent office. Many of you, I understand, are from the veteran service organizations, and these are things like the Wounded Warrior Project, Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, IAVA. Many of them are running programs to help train and segue and transition their service members into civilian employment. You could contact them, and they may have contacts that can help you find people. And finally, the Chamber of Commerce has their program called Hiring Our Heroes, and that's information geared for employers like yourself. And that's a lot to throw at you, and I encourage you to go through that information. And again, the way we're going to present, this is the session for today, we read your minds and we figured out what some of the biggest concerns you have, but also some of these things may be misperceptions or myths. So we have the 9 of them that are very prevalent, and we're going to present them one after the other, and then present data, resources. Joe has decades of experience working first in the military and then helping transitioning service members into civilian employment. The idea is to really go into the weeds and give you specifics, not just to refer you off to places, but to really give you ideas that you can use in your own work. And we understand that you're small nonprofit organizations and you're overworked and understaffed, so our ideas have been generated with that in mind to give you the direct ideas. So we'll go through the different myths and provide the guidance. And we are designing this not to be the death march through the PowerPoint slides, so Joe and I will alternate back and forth without a formal script, and we certainly encourage to make this participatory. So please use the chat function, and we'll be tracking it, and we will answer your questions as they come up. And then we will leave time at the end for the general Q&A. And before we begin the first myth, I just want to thank all of you for caring about the transitioning service members, particularly the wounded warriors. If you've heard it in the news, what we're finding now is that more service members and more veterans are killing themselves than have died in service. So more are dying by their own hands than died in combat. And it's very hard to understand the reasons for suicide, but the understanding we're getting is that frequently, many of the reasons are financial, and the unemployment, we believe, is really affecting their perceptions of them being useful people and certainly affecting their financial situation. So in no small way, by helping to address the unemployment situation of wounded warriors, you're on the side of the angels, I believe, to really help out what's becoming a national problem. So we can start with myth 1 on the next slide. The one that we hear frequently is a lot of employers say they cannot find any veterans to hire. And I can see where this could be an issue, especially if you're a smaller organization, if you haven't really worked with veterans or service members before. As I had mentioned, we've got about 1.5 million people who have served in the military, and many are transitioning out of the military. Frequently, they're downsizing the military, and that's pushing more people out. Many have been wounded in the course of their service and are now looking to transition to civilian employment a lot sooner than they expected because they've been disabled. And some creative ideas, we did list those resources at the beginning that can give you suggestions of places to go to and websites. We have some other creative ideas. One would be during the Veterans Day Parade. Go visit, go attend with a bunch of your business cards, and if you see anyone of interest, start to strike up a conversation. The groups there may have connections to the local Veterans Hall or might be looking. I would also recommend you can contact other civic organizations you may have contacts with. The Kiwanis, the Masonic Order. I also think houses of worship. Speak with the leader of that organization, either the lay or the clergy, because they may be working with families who are in their membership who are looking for the jobs. So if you're a member of a church, synagogue, mosque, temple, work with that organization and let them know you're looking, and they are usually well acquainted with the people in that community. Another idea could be if you're in a smaller community, send out a press release that says, introduces your organization and mention that you're really making a commitment to hire wounded warriors and transitioning service members. If the local paper picks that up, then it'll be distributed throughout the community, and a veteran who sees that can get in contact with you. Other suggestions would be to contact the DVOP and LIVR. And in addition, there's the national and local VAs. I can recommend them, but just even from my personal experience, they can be very bureaucratic. Even with all the work I've done, I still have difficulty in getting into the VA and getting contacts. So we can suggest it, but you will need perseverance, and I would recommend having a plan B and a plan C as well, particularly in the local area. And if you happen to be in an area with a military base, every military base has the Transition Assistance Program, the TAP office. And if you're in that military base, you can start to make contacts with the TAP office. At the end of the presentation, we'll present our email addresses, and I encourage you, if you have questions or about specifics, to please get in touch with us, and we can maybe refer you to someone that you could, or some organization that could help. Joe, do you want to throw in some ideas?
Oh, yeah, Dr. Ainspan, that was, a lot of great information and great tools to use. Just so everybody kind of knows, I'm a 22-year Army veteran, and I retired about 10 years ago, and all I've done since I retired is help veterans find jobs. So I've been doing this for many, many years, and throughout those years, I've stumbled and fell and kind of, had a lot of do's and don'ts and things. So a lot of good resources are out there, and a lot of them are not so good. So what I'd like to do is just talk to you a little bit about, when people say that they can't find veterans, it's one of those myths that I definitely challenge, because they are out there all over the place in droves. It's just a matter of, where to find them. So in addition to some of the things that Dr. Ainspan just talked about, one of the things that I always use for tools is that, and these are all free resources. As long as you got access to a computer and the internet, you can find these guys. There's two basic services that military members use when transitioning out of the military. The Marine Corps, the Navy, and the Air Force use what Dr. Ainspan mentioned earlier, the TAP. It's TAP, and it just basically stands for Transition Assistance Program. If you just Google that, just Transition Assistance Program, you will see a website. It'll take you there, and it will list every Marine Corps, Navy, and Air Force base in the world. It will give you phone numbers, it will give you email addresses, and it will give you contact names of who to contact at those installations to to find out who's getting out and, hey, I've got this opportunity in, such and such Arkansas or Colorado or whatever. Even though you may be a small local organization and you're looking for people local and you're trying to think, well, how does this relate to me? I'm not looking for someone who's over in Europe or Korea or whatever. But you got to understand, people coming out of the military, they're open to relocation. They'll go anywhere. And a lot of them may be from your local area. There may be a guy at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, getting out of the military, he's transitioning, and he may be coming right back to your local community, and you're not even aware of that. So by using this free resource and posting all your information out there to these bases, there are counselors at each one of these bases that get paid based on how many people they help find jobs. So that's those three branches, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force. Now, the Army uses a different site, and it's called Army Career and Alumni Program, ACAP, A-C-A-P. So if you just Google that, again, you'll find a website that's going to have, you're going to have email addresses, phone numbers, mailing addresses, all the contact information of every military or every Army transitioning office in the world. And so those two resources right there is just huge. It's free. It's easy to use. It's very, you can go to those websites, save them in your favorites, and you've got them there forever. The other thing is when we look at, there's about 250,000 veterans that get out of the military every single year. These are trained, and that number is going to go up because of the downsizing. So as these guys are transitioning out, a lot of them will stay in the reserves and National Guard. So they'll go back to your local communities. Every one of your local communities has got a National Guard, Reserve, Air National Guard, Marine Reserve, Navy Reserve. I mean, if you can go out and, again, Google is my favorite tool. I tell you, me and Google, we get along real well. But when I'm looking for those hard to find places, and if you're in a place that doesn't have a military base around, I guarantee you that you've got a reserve base somewhere close by. And it's just a matter of Googling it, finding that information, and then get that contact. And lots and lots of veterans out there. And veterans are networked probably tighter than any organization that you'll ever find. Every veteran is going to know where all the other veterans are. Where do they hang out? They're going to have friends. They're going to, so referrals is huge. And that's about, as far as, finding veterans to hire, that's, I think those are probably some of the tips that I can provide.
Okay. One question we got is, are vets falling through the cracks? Unfortunately, many are. There's the other comment, many are going to prison. We're finding, unfortunately, a great deal of homeless veterans who are out there. And in a way, many vets go hiding because once they leave the service, they want to get on with their life. Many are connected, but some will also just want to leave the service, may go home where they don't have too many other around them, and then just may disappear in a way. But you can still find them that are out there. So we encourage you to go after these resources, go talk to other vets, and get information from them. Ask them, get information, get other suggestions. To get to myth number 2, this myth is, I'm doing a good deed. This one is true, mostly. You will be doing a good deed. As I said, you're on the side of the angels and helping the vets. However, we do want to get you out of the idea that you're doing this because of you pity or you're trying to do charity. When you're hiring a veteran, you want to make sure that you're hiring someone to do a job, and you've reached out to get them for the skills that they can bring in. You don't want to get them a job just because you'll feel good, because this can help you, help the community. It's to do a purpose. And along those lines, we also reiterated when I was working at the Office of Disability Employment Policy, it is okay to fire a wounded warrior or someone with a disability if they're not up to the job. You can expect them to produce as if they weren't disabled. So if they're showing up and goofing off, taking 3-hour lunches, don't be afraid to reprimand them and even to terminate them. I'm definitely a living testament to this myth right here, because that's what I do here at Macy's. I am the military recruiter for Macy's. So in a sense, I am the gatekeeper for military veterans coming into our organization in any capacity.
And I tell you, it's one of those real, I mean, I am doing a great deed, and I love my job, and I feel great about it when I go home. But I also have to understand that I have to protect Macy's. I have to protect our interest. I will be the first to attest that, military veterans, although we've all done a great service for our country, just because they're veterans does not mean that they're necessarily good veterans or good people. There's we just have to be kind of careful about that, because we do. Veterans are just people. They're just like people like anybody else. They just happen to have had a different path in life, and so there are times that we have to terminate people and things like that, and it's just because it's a business. We are running a business.
And below in the slide beneath us, we get into the legal aspects of it, of if you'll get in trouble, if you'll be protected. The next myth we have is myth number 3, and this one is that the veterans don't have the skills, knowledge, or background to do this kind of work. And
well, I'd like to jump in on that one right away. And really, because I'll tell you that this is one thing that when I started this military recruiting initiative for Macy's, and I've done it for other organizations as well. I've recruited veterans for everything from, the steel industry to, retail to, you name it, healthcare. I've recruited all of it. And so, what I always tell everybody is you're not recruiting these guys because they know how to come in and run a retail store, or they know how to operate a warehouse, or whatever the situation is. We're recruiting veterans because of the core skill sets they have, the work ethic, the discipline, the motivation. That's the stuff that we can teach a veteran anything. You can teach them to run a retail store. You can teach them to fly a plane. You can teach them to operate a forklift. Are they teachable? That's what we're looking for.
And that's one thing we're finding. It's as we get into one of the myths that we see is that people make presumptions about veterans. The worst one would be that it's Rambo. It's someone who's about to be PTSD. You want to be careful about making presumptions about veterans because they look like the rest of America. There are good ones, there are talented people, less talented, very energetic, very lazy ones as well. You do want to get away from generalizing, because if you start saying one has and they all do this, then you can set yourself up for some issues there. And however, with that in mind, one way that you can generalize is if you've gone through and survived the military experience, it's fairly safe to generalize that. As Joe was saying, you have a lot of very positive traits. You show up to work on time. You know how to get stuff done and meet the mission when you have limited information, virtually no money, no support. You go in there and it gets done no matter what. Teamwork as well. It's a very diverse experience. They receive training. You're either fighting or your training has been the line that's been used. So they know how to train and how to adapt and how to pick up. They also respect authority. And I've seen studies of CEOs and other hiring executives, and no matter what, from McDonald's up to IBM and Google, they want people who will show up on time, be willing to put in an honest day work, and get it done and not complain. And when I mention that to veterans, this is like oxygen to them, because everybody around them does this. They don't realize they have it. So in many ways, this is a strong selling point to make to employers, because the vet may not mention it during the interview. Any questions coming up, or I guess move on to myth number 4. This is a problem that we hear is they won't fit into our culture. And this taps into the question of the fact that most veterans are very adaptable. They can go from Antarctica to Afghanistan in the time it takes them to fly. Again, we don't want to generalize. There might be some cultures, though, that they may not fit into. If a veteran is used to waking up early and gets to work at 6 a.m. and then goes work for a company where everyone rolls in about 9:30 or 10, I heard of a case like this. They saw him leaving at 3, and he got in trouble for that because everyone else would stay till 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night. It's very rare, but for any individual, I've had jobs where I've fit into the culture and done very well, and others where I haven't and I bombed. So this isn't saying, again, that all vets will fit in well. It's very useful, and this is true also for volunteers as well. If the culture and the individual don't mesh, it won't be a good fit. So one thing we recommend in the world of human resources, there's a realistic job preview where you really try and lay out what the job is like, and we also recommend that you think about a realistic culture preview. What is the culture of your organization like? What is it that someone has to do to succeed in that organization. And if you can understand that, besides bringing in volunteers who are veterans, this would be useful for any kind of employer or any kind of volunteer. Let them know and know where the fit is. And for some organizations that they may not be able to get a good fit, this may have implications beyond just that one case or that one veteran. If an organization, for example, is finding that many times women will quit and women don't really get ahead, it could be because there's a male chauvinistic culture. And if you're starting to see that as a problem and it reoccurs, it may be time to re-examine the culture. Usually cultures can be beneficial in how things get done. They can also have their drawbacks. And if that's the case, it can be hard to change a culture, but it could be a good, honest discussion if there's something almost toxic in your environment. And the vet, in many cases, could be the canary in the mine to point that out. Let's see, Joe, any questions or any experiences with that?
No, the only thing I got to say is that I think this is really, the veterans are going to fit into any culture. They're very adaptable. They're going to fit in. It's really up to the company to provide the culture. So if there's an issue with a veteran fitting into a culture, that issue is going to be much broader. It's not going to be just a veteran having issues. They probably already have, corporate-wide issues anyway. So to reiterate what you're saying, it's just, ensuring the organizations are providing that stable environment, a good culture for anybody to work in. But the veterans will adapt.
And one thing we should add is hard skills are usually easier to learn than the soft skills. And these soft skills are showing up on time, having a good attitude, understanding customer service. If you're working, to pick on Macy's, you can probably learn the stock, the coding system, the computer, but someone who's not going to snarl at the customers, that really can't be taught too well.
Mm-hmm.
So a vet who comes in with that kind of skills could be taught, as you're saying, virtually any specific organization, most of the skills they would need on the job. To get to the next slide, myth number 5 is they're going to freak out on me. And this is a concern about PTSD and traumatic brain injury, TBI. We're finding that these are the signature injuries of the current conflict. About 20% of the people they believe are coming back with PTSD. 28% have been exposed to a potential traumatic brain injury situation. Depression is also coming as one of the major symptoms we're seeing. So a lot of the vets that are coming back have PTSD and TBI. This is a source of anxiety for recruiters and hiring managers and employees as well. If I'm sitting next to this guy and I make a comment, is he going to hurt me? We're finding very few cases where this actually happens. To try and understand what the anxiety might be, they've noticed that there's a pyramid of disabilities and anxieties. And this is based on the fact that it's the one minority group that's always bringing in new members. The odds of me becoming a woman are very slim, but the odds of me needing a wheelchair if I cross the street and get hit by a bus, or the odds of me losing my vision or my sight, or my vision or my hearing, are almost probable. So being disabled is something that almost anybody can happen to them, and they can join that group. And they feel that part of the anxiety that we're feeling could be the fact that if I see someone in a wheelchair or someone who's having other disabilities, I can become that way. They remind me of my own mortality and remind me of my own fragility of life, and that creates this anxious feeling. And unfortunately, for the wounded warriors, the invisible disabilities, namely depression, PTSD, and TBI, they're the highest part of the pyramid where we feel the most anxious around them. So by working with this population, you're really taking on the toughest case. Where if someone's missing a leg, that can be, we have an easier time with that than someone who may have PTSD. Once you understand where the anxiety is coming from, that can be the first way that you can address it. When I started working in this area, I did feel it, and I could understand, and I could adapt and work my way to come through that anxiety. The best way to work with the veteran would be to talk to them, particularly with their PTSD, and we'll explain how you can do this, but ask them what kind of help they would use in terms of accommodations. The good news when it comes to PTSD and TBI is that when it comes to accommodations, you can usually do it fairly cheaply and fairly easily. In terms of something like memory, you can use a recorder, a notebook to record things if someone has TBI. If someone is easily startled because they have PTSD, One good idea I heard was they went to Walmart and bought one of those rear view mirrors you can put on your car to see everything, slapped that up on the cubicle wall behind his monitor, so now anybody who'd walk in, he would see them, and then that reduced that problem. Really, you just need to work with the employee or the volunteer, find out honestly how the PTSD or TBI affects them, and then work with them around that. And with both of these illnesses, they do wax and wane over time. So symptoms may retreat, they may reemerge. Be flexible with the person. Many will know if they are feeling overwhelmed, allow them to just, if necessary, leave the room and go for a walk and come back. Be understanding that someone may be okay today and then may need a little extra time tomorrow, and be understanding and work to accommodate them.
Yeah, we just hired a wounded warrior a couple weeks ago, and what was interesting for me is that how open and honest these guys are. They just want you to be frank with them. That's it. It was so easy for me to just sit down and just have a conversation with this guy and just be honest and say, hey, look, what can we do for you? What do you need from us to be successful in this opportunity that we're presenting you? And I mean, he appreciated that from me. He appreciated the fact that I didn't tiptoe around. It wasn't like we were, he doesn't want to be treated special or anything like that. It was just that frank and open, what can we do? He's there to do a job. We want him to do a job. Let's just cut to the chase and figure out what we need to do to make it happen.
And then scanning the questions, to get to the next myth. This one I actually did some work on at the Department of Labor. This is going to be really expensive to accommodate it, because usually when we think about workplace accommodations, the first thought that comes into mind is I'm going to have to install ramps everywhere, I'm going to have to do all this and all that. When I was at DOL, we actually surveyed companies that made accommodations to the workforce, and it was about 600 companies. Only 4% said that they had to do an ongoing annual cost of the company. The sheer majority, it was a one-time cost, and when we asked what this cost was, the average number came out to be about $500 to make the accommodation. This methodology is there were a couple of companies that made large-scale changes to the organization. One company purchased a town car for the employee and attributed that price to the accommodation, so that raised the mean. If you get away from looking at the mean and looked at actual responses, for 57% of the companies that made these accommodations, they said the accommodations cost zero, that they could do it at absolutely no cost. And the way that this was done was usually making a change in schedule, putting something like that mirror up, moving the office around so that the individual's back wasn't to the door, so they're looking into the door. If someone was getting headaches because of TBI, they can lower the lights as needed. So again, you can accommodate PTSD and TBI relatively cheaply. And because symptoms can vary from each individual, you really do need to ask them. You really have to really analyze what's involved with the job and what they can do, what they can't do, and what they can do if you get them the right tool. One person had trouble standing on a production line, so they found one of those like 4-foot stools that they could use, and that was no problem. The experience that I've seen is really the only disabled muscle that can't be accommodated is the human brain. And that's because what I mean by that is people don't get creative in figuring out the problems. If you can think creatively, you can pretty much overcome anything. Possibly a blind person may not be able to become a truck driver, but beyond that, I haven't seen anyone else's dream shot down because of their disability. There was one medical doctor who was blind, and people thought he wouldn't be able to do his job. Asked his patients, and it turned out he actually did a great job because he couldn't read the charts. He actually, God forbid, had to sit you down and ask you what's wrong and had to listen to what you said. And his patients noticed that he was diagnosing. He was picking up so many more things and hearing and offering solutions. And we had mentioned this before, and I'll mention it here. The best resource, if you're looking to do accommodations, is Ask Jan. the Job Accommodation Network, and it's a bunch of experts out of West Virginia University who are there to answer your questions. So if you have a person who has low vision and wants to become a doctor, they will recommend the techniques, the tools. They have a database of hardware, of adaptive technologies and keyboards, and their big focus is to do this as cheaply as possible. So if you have someone who's transitioning with a disability, has a question, give them the JAN information. You can contact it as well. My mother had arthritis and wanted to type, so I called them. Immediately they had 3 links for keyboards she could use. So really, it's free. Your tax dollars paid for it. Get hold of JAN and get accommodations, and you'll find, and what we saw with this study we did is virtually every organization said it was well worth the investment. For that $500 or the free investment, they found they had a very dedicated employee who showed up, who basically was grateful for that job and never forgot it.
Yep.
So, Joe, anything on your side?
No, not from this side. We've never incurred any expense, to accommodate anybody.
Okay, so going on to myth number 7. This can get a bit sticky, and Joe's probably dealt with the experience. They're going to sue us. We know the Americans with Disabilities Act is in place. In addition, if they're coming out of service, there's USERRA, which is the Uniform Service Employment and Reemployment Act. And basically this says that if someone was called up into service while they were working for you, they need to return to a job that's the equivalent of where they would have been had they continued service with you. It is possible to be sued under either of these laws. Unfortunately, as it applies to labor law in this country, all you need is one ticked-off former employee and one lawyer who's willing to take the case, and that can go to court. And it can be a difficult situation. They say if you've already made it to the courtroom, you've lost. It can become a nuisance lawsuit. But this goes beyond just disabilities. People can sue under EEO. If a woman was fired, she could sue because of because she was a woman. We see a lot of these cases. The best defense, as they say, is a good offense, is to make sure you're doing things right. Of course, someone could try and sue you. If your ducks are in a row, hopefully the opposition lawyer will see that and realize the case wouldn't be worth it. So think what you're doing, do the right thing, and this should mitigate this myth. The big thing with ADA is, by law, it states there need to be reasonable accommodations. So if someone is insisting that you have to build a new building or move to a new location because you have 2 steps, that would be seen as not reasonable, and the jury would find in your favor if it came to that. It's also the law understands that you are hiring this person to do a job, and if they can't do the qualifications with accommodations, then it was okay that you didn't hire them. If they couldn't do X, and that's what the job required, that is a rational, legally binding, and okay decision. There are protections for the employer as well. The big thing to be careful of under ADA is how and what you can ask the person. This is always a sticky situation. You can't go out and say, like, oh, do you have PTSD? I know you served in the war. The way you can do this to meet your needs without breaking the law is you can specify what the job requires. You can say, in order to do this job, you need to be able to lift 20 pounds and need to do this and this. Are you able to do that? In a similar way, these are what's called bona fide occupational qualifications, BFOC. In a similar way, if you're running a movie theater and Friday night and Saturdays are your big days, you could ask someone, mention this, a Jewish person, if they can't work on those days, that's a legitimate exclusion. And a good source of ADA information, if you have questions, is the Northeast ADA Center at this number and this website. Anything on your side?
No, I just think that, you hit it on the head as far as just really kind of just using common sense, and just as long as you're just being smart about how you're interviewing and asking questions and the hires. The biggest myth to me, I think, though, is that people get really afraid that once they get a veteran on board, that they're afraid to let them go or to terminate them because they're afraid of being sued, when in reality it all comes down to the fact of you hired someone to do a job. Whether they're a veteran or not is irrelevant. If they can or cannot do the job, that's how you make your hiring and termination decisions. as long as you're sticking to those, I mean, there's, everybody will be fine.
One question we got was the source of the data I presented, and that's the JAN website. They have the report up there on the cost of accommodations. Myth number 8 is they will leave us. This can be a concern. We realize we have data on the unemployment rate of veterans. We have the unemployment rate for people with disabilities. One thing we don't know, what we don't know, is if and how soon they leave these organizations. We believe this is an even bigger problem than the employment, in that the veterans will join and find that they don't fit in well with the culture, that there is some kind of miscommunication, and they quit and go on to other jobs. And we're just starting to understand what's involved with this. I know Macy's has been really good with this. Quickly, the things that we've seen is peer groups. A number of organizations will form veteran peer groups where they'll meet for lunch, they'll communicate with each other. Phenomenal source, because this now becomes the recruiting source. You can go to this group for ideas on how to recruit, test your message with them, ask them to know other people that they know. For many of your organizations out there, in a way, the departure would be good because they're graduating from out of the AmeriCorps and other programs into full-time employment as well. So many ways for them to move on from you is a good sign.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think that, it's important to understand, too, that a large majority of military veterans coming out of the military service, when they deploy overseas, all their pay is tax-free. They make actually a lot of money when they're deployed overseas. And so a majority of them will have a pretty hefty bank account when they get back, and it's not uncommon for me as a recruiter to see people who will take a year or two off between transitioning out and really seriously looking for that full-time job. They kind of want to take some time and travel and, maybe decompress or whatever, and so a lot of them will want to go into these volunteer positions. They're actually looking and they're trying to seek out either some kind of a service opportunity or a volunteer position or something where they can just kind of have an impact and have a purpose to get up every single day, but not jump right into the rat race of a corporate career. They're going to take a couple of years and do that. So, to Dr. Ainspan's point, when they're joining your organizations and then leaving, that I guess would be expected. I mean, at some point they're gonna move on and they're gonna get full-time employment and stuff. So it really just depends on your organization as to how impactful that will be on you.
Tracking the questions, I think we're on top of it. And then the final myth, is where we can really get into it, is that you're overwhelmed, you don't know where to turn. So again, we reference back to the resources at the beginning of the page and some of the other ideas that we have. That all those can help you. And then there's also, I mentioned the tax credits. Some of the examples they have, recent legislation has been passed. If you hire a veteran, they stay at least 4 weeks, there is a $2,400 corporate tax benefit that you'll receive, $5,600 for hiring a wounded warrior who stays at least 6 months. And then there's also the Wounded Warriors Tax Credit, which is $9,600 per hire for a service-related disability. In terms of small organization, it's certainly easier if you're a large organization like Macy's, where you have dedicated recruiters and dedicated people. If you're a small nonprofit, you don't have that resource, but you probably are aligned with other nonprofits. You're probably aligned with the community leaders in your area, religious leaders, political leaders. As I found when I was job searching, if you go through the What Color Is Your Parachute book by Bowles, you really have to let everybody know that you're looking for a job. So in a similar way, the logic applies. You need to let everybody know that you're looking to work with these wounded warriors. P.S., it's also very good publicity, positive publicity for your group. But as Joe had mentioned, there are maps that they presented last week. There are veterans in virtually every community in every state across the Union. So they're out there. We've seen that the unemployment rate, especially for the current conflict, is higher than the comparative rate for similarly aged people. So there's a lot of people out there looking for jobs, looking for their next job. Get out there, get the word out there, start talking to these resources, and make contacts, and I believe you'll get many good candidates coming through to you. To throw out one project I'm working on for a division of the American Psychological Association, and contact me as we're working with veterans to help them review and redo their resumes. So if you have any that are working with that and need that kind of help, feel free to contact me. Otherwise, get out there, get the word out there, and you'll be, I think, impressed and surprised with what you'll find. Joe, do you have examples that you've found helpful?
Not really. Not on this myth. I mean, I haven't been exposed too much to any of these. No.
Joe, could you possibly, this is Debbie, could you
Yes.
possibly speak about some of the things that you've done within Macy's that may be transferable to smaller organizations in their search for veterans as members and volunteers?
Well, culture and the peer groups, I think.
The peer group we definitely do. I think that was one of probably the first things that I established when they brought me on board. Is we're a company of 166,000 employees. That's the first step is how many veterans do we already have working for us, and then establish that kind of peer networking group. So, I think that's always a great thing because that really establishes that the military is just such a tight brotherhood. And a lot of people would come out, and that's where you start having people come out of the woodwork saying, hey, I'm a veteran. One of the biggest challenges for us is that people don't walk around with veteran stamped on their forehead. So it's like when you guys are out looking for these veterans to hire or to bring into your volunteer positions or internships or whatever you guys are recruiting for, that's the toughest thing is that, you could be surrounded by military veterans every day and not really know it unless you ask. And so that's what I did was I started to ask, and I started to get these people to pull out, created this veteran networking group, and then we created an actual subgroup on LinkedIn that's called Macy's Military Veterans. And so everybody's connected, and we just, every week we share articles that are related to military and whatever, and it kind of keeps people engaged and keeps people talking, whether they're veterans or they've got children in the military or whatever. But anyway, so we kind of do that. One of the other things that, when we talk about the transferable skills and stuff, people coming out of the military, is, we have created here at Macy's, we've created programs to teach them. We're only looking for the core skill set. So whether you're a Navy guy, Air Force guy, flying, airplanes, helicopters, whatever, an infantry guy, it doesn't really matter what you did in the military. Nobody here at Macy's really cares. What we look for, what we do care about is the core skill sets, the discipline, the work ethic, the loyalty, those kind of things. And so what we've done is created training programs to teach them how to, whether it's a 6-week training course on how to manage a warehouse or a year-long executive development program to run a Macy's store, those kind of things. So we've created those opportunities for them, and that is what the military veterans love. And I've heard this literally from them, that where they will tell me, Joe, the reason I chose to come work for Macy's is because you guys are willing to invest time to train me. A lot of companies out there are offering jobs. A lot of people are saying, hey, come work for us. We'll pay you X amount of dollars, come work. But, what they're doing is they're just, they're bringing them on board, get them on the payroll, get your benefits started. You spend maybe 2 or 3 days learning the company, and then they throw them out there and expect them to perform. And nobody likes that feeling. That's an uncomfortable feeling. So any company that's willing to take them and train them and coach them and mentor them, that's a huge, huge benefit for us. So, so establishing those networks, bring those tight, bring those groups where they can vent off each other and, bounce ideas off each other within the organization has helped tremendously.
And I would say if you're a small nonprofit of maybe a dozen people and you don't have that peer group available, as Macy's would, encourage your vet to maybe form one in the community with other small nonprofits.
Yeah, that's a great point, yeah.
Give them the leave time to go off for 2 hours for lunch and encourage them to meet. If this man or woman knows other vets, organize a lunch once a month and let them go and talk to each other. You can't really get a peer group with your organization, but allow a peer group with other affiliated nonprofits.
Yeah.
They help each other, and all you can then tap their knowledge for other recruitment opportunities.
We have a really good relationship with our local colleges around here that have ROTC programs in them. And, again, thinking veterans coming out of the military and we're trying to find where they're at, well, how many of those veterans are using their GI Bill right now to go to college? And so a lot of them, and you can, that new GI Bill pays really well, so you almost don't have to work. And so So I do a lot of recruiting out of the colleges around, and that's how I find where all the veterans are. I go to the colleges and say, what veterans have you got going to school here, and then start building networks with them. I actually had a veteran reach out to me yesterday, and he's looking for a summer internship. It's part of his graduation requirements. He has to do an internship, and it doesn't have to be paid or anything, but he he doesn't want a full. I talked to him about coming to work for me, and he doesn't want to come to work. He doesn't want a full-time job. He just wants an internship. And so, he's got enough money. He saved up enough while he was deployed. He's drawn enough on his GI Bill that he doesn't have to work. And so those veterans are all out there, and it was just kind of surprising to see that yesterday.
And most good-sized schools are going after the GI Bill money, and schools are creating positions like a Dean of Veterans Affairs.
Yes, they are.
Dean, some kind of leader. Call the universities, the colleges near you, even trade schools, and ask who is in charge of vets programs.
Yeah.
Odds are there'll be an individual, and if you say you want to hire his students, trust me, you'll get a phone call back.
Oh, yeah. Especially for those, for those like year-long, like those volunteer positions or those, internships or whatever it is that you guys have that are more on the temporary role. I think it's really important because as these guys are in school, their focus for the next 4 years is going to school. That's what they're doing. They're using their GI Bill. They're going to school. They're getting their degree. But, these are veterans. They're busy people. They want to do something else. They want to have a purpose to get up every day and feel good about, providing a service to their community or whatever. So that's a great, great target for you guys to go after, to find someone who's not necessarily looking for that full-time job, but over the course of the next 3 to 4 years, they're looking for something to do.
And if you offer part-time internships as well, that avenue, if someone just wants a few hours a week to learn more skills while they're completing their degree, you can benefit the school, the veteran, and your organization as well. So I think if there's interest, let's open the phones up to questions from everyone.
Okay, Nate, what we can do is see if participants, if you have a question that you would like to ask Dr. Ainspan or Joe, we have the raise your hand icon right above the chat panel on the right-hand side. Nikki's going to point it out here. And if you have a question that you would like to ask of our presenters, please use the raise hand feature, and we will unmute your phone so you can chat with the presenters.
And we promise not to bite or get sarcastic.
Or you can type in also another question in the chat panel if you'd like. We've had a lot of really great discussion in the chat panel right now and had a lot of conversations going back and forth among many of our participants. So those questions and answers are going to be captured in our edited chat and will be put on our Veterans and Military Families Knowledge Network. So we will add that with our Part 1 chat as well and put that all together for participants from both Part 1 and Part 2 to be able to see. So thank you guys very much for the rich conversation that you guys had. We did get one typed in just a second ago that says, I'm interested in the resources you are using for your statistics on people afflicted with PTSD and TBI. So
the standard source.
Go ahead, Nathan.
I was going to say the standard source that found that 20 and 30% was the RAND Corporation, R-A-N-D. The study was called The Invisible Wounds of War, and that's available on their website. Subsequently, the Army's done surveys of transitioning service members, and they're tending to find numbers close to what RAND originally found, around the 20 to 30%. There was a comment here, there is comorbidity occurring that someone who has traumatic brain injury unfortunately, will probably also have depression, potentially PTSD as well, plus there could be physical problems stemming from not being able to use their muscles depending on how they were injured. But the RAND study it's a great source of really the data and how they got the information.
Great. Nate, is that also the study that did the $500 was the average for the accommodations?
That was the Job Accommodation Network, Ask Jan.
All right,
and
thank you
that's
so
available
much.
on their website as well.
Great.
We could
probably.
probably.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
I was going to say we could probably put the links to the actual PDF files so people don't have to go searching through the websites.
Oh, great. What I'll do is I will get those from you, and we can put it in the edited chat.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
You can use Google, but it'd be easier just to go straight to the source.
Great. Thank you. We have another question here. If we hire a veteran before he or she transitions out of the service, can we get a break on the cost of the technology assistance if we, the employer, is in the private sector rather than the government employee?
With the CAP program, as long as they're still in the transition process, they get the technology, and they can take it with them wherever they go.
Great. Thank you.
If they're,
Margie has a... Oh.
I was going to say, if they're a
Go
government employee and they leave to go to the private sector, the equipment stays with them. Or, excuse me, the equipment stays with the government. But if they're transitioning vet, it's their personal property.
All righty. Any last questions that we have, we will go ahead and put in our chat feature and ask our panelists to answer those for us, and we'll capture them in the chat for you. We're going to have Margie Legowski now give us a summary of what she heard today based on our learning goals, and then we'll bring our session to a close. Margie?
Actually, I'm gonna flip the tables for a second. You've all been representing or wearing 3 different hats today. One is as an employer yourself. The other is as a national service program recruiting veterans as volunteers or members. And the third is as a national service program that serves veterans and military families, particularly in the areas of employment. So my question is actually to all of you, and I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you would like to do this. What are the key things you are taking away from this? Because Joe, for example, represents the corporate sector, and he talked about and used the word employment and hiring, and so did Nate. So how would you translate this, or what are you taking away from this webinar that you can use in your national service program? So there's no wrong answer. Just interested in hearing some of your feedback. So please raise your hand, and we'll open the line for you.
All right, Jeremy, we see your hand, so we're going to unmute you now. Thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah, this is Jeremy at Georgia Serves. We've got 3 Veteran Leader Corps members that are starting next week, and so I think as they kind of work on our blueprint strategies in the counties that they'll be serving, really helping to identify veteran-friendly employers that are already in existence, and then working with chambers of commerce to help them think through these myths and understand that veterans are going to be a great source of talent for them going forward. You know, really articulating the benefits of hiring veterans because of their experiences, their leadership abilities, and then those tax credits that are available to them as well might certainly kind of help ease the pain of hiring if they know that there's something, quote unquote, in it for them beyond just doing the right thing.
Great, thank you. How about Mary Carmen? Vicki, can you open the line for someone?
Hey, do you have me?
Yeah, excellent. Mary Carmen, what would you like to share?
Yes, ma'am. I just think that it's wonderful just getting the information that you can have on hand, because you always come in contact with people who are misinformed about veterans. And I think it's an awesome way to serve and to really be their voice, so to speak, about all of the myths that and misconceptions that people have about them.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sure, and let's hear from one more person, something that you're going to take away from this webinar. Don't be shy. Okay. Well, I think one of the things, oh, Amber, go right ahead. We're unmuting you right now.
Yes, one moment. We're getting to Amber. All right, she's unmuted. Amber, go right ahead.
Thank you. So I am a volunteer, and my ex-husband served in Baghdad, Afghanistan, Iraq. He was deployed during our marriage. And for me, I feel strongly about volunteer efforts because of what we experienced. And I'm taking away from this all of the wonderful websites, resources, and it'll help me to continue what I do, which is try to volunteer and help in any way that I can. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And finally, what I would like to share, because this is something that I've been taking away from this and also part one, it's the slide that you saw at the very, very beginning. Our service members who represent the face of America, just like our national service members, they sometimes become wounded, ill, or injured, just like the rest of us, but the injuries don't prevent them from contributing to society and continuing to serve. Instead, it makes them more resilient, determined, and committed. And I just really want to leave you with that thought. And then another thing, which might be an interesting conversation starter to have with some of your volunteers, particularly I'm thinking of our senior corps programs. You may recall the movie The Best Years of Our Lives with Jimmy Stewart. And I know I'm dating myself here, but it would tap into that other side of the brain, the emotional part, in helping people to understand the challenge of coming back from war and looking for employment and what that struggle is like. So I just throw that out there. And finally, Debbie, I think you want to wind up for us?
Great, I can do that. All I wanted to say now is to thank everybody for being on the phone call with us today. If you have not been a part of this series, we've had 3 webinars, or almost 4 actually, on post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. Our first webinars were about explaining the disorder a little, and then resources to help both yourself and the veterans understand traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress. And then part 1 and 2 of getting veterans in service to your organization. So we'll be sending out all this information, so you'll be able to put the whole webinar series together and have all the resources at your fingertips. We also want to thank today's presenters for their time and effort with us today. Nate and Joe, thank you very much for all the information you provided with us. Also, we have an upcoming webinar coming up at the end of April. Margie, would you just like to say a couple words about what you're hoping to do regarding the WESTAT study in April?
Absolutely. We've had the opportunity, and some of you may have participated in this, to do a descriptive study of the National Service Veteran and Military Family Programs. It's not an outcome study, but it does give us some information about some of the qualities or characteristics of strong national service programs. And what we'd like to do during that webinar is share the findings with you and have a conversation about the kinds of strategies that you use in your program that others might be able to take back and use in their programs as well. So it's a wonderful opportunity to learn more about the bigger picture, particularly as you're shaping your programs in this new year. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you so much, Margie. That webinar is scheduled for Wednesday, April 24th, and more information will be on the Knowledge Network for you soon and out in your mailboxes. With that, I would just like to thank everybody and say goodbye. Evaluation will be popping up on your screens after this. Please fill it out for us and let us know how better we can serve you in upcoming webinars. Thank you again, everybody, and have a great afternoon or evening. Goodbye.
Thank you.
The thing is that we have the PowerPoint, right?
Pardon me?
Your email you sent has the PowerPoint.
The email I sent, which email? To this has the PowerPoint.